the meeting will be recorded for everyone's information. My name is Mahmoud Abdel-Bakyand. I'm the office managing partner for Dentons in Saudi. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Neil Cuthbert, who served as the office managing partner for the Middle East offices and was the member of the firm's global board for many, many years. Neil has been recently working with many Chinese contractors who are looking to expand into the Middle East and Africa for the past few years. He will be discussing today the opportunities that Chinese contractors bring to the Middle East and particularly Saudi. I will discuss towards the end of the presentation some of the opportunities that we see in Saudi and some of the challenges. Neil, over to you.
Thanks, Mahmoud. Just trying to do the slides. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the Belt and Road Initiative, look at some of the challenges facing BRI in the Middle East as a result of sort of recent events in 2020. And then I will go into some of the different financing models that Chinese contractors and suppliers use in international financing. And time permitting, I'll have a look at a quick case study of an interesting project here in the UAE, and then summarize with the sort of really an update on sort of the impact of COVID-19 on infrastructure projects here in the Middle East. Okay, so just to start a little bit with sort of some of the background for some of you that are not so familiar with Belt and Road. The Belt and Road is one of China's key policy initiatives and a part of its plan to assert its position as one of the world's strongest economic powers. Originally, it was labeled One Belt, One Road, or OBOR. But it's now universally called Belt and Road Initiative, or for short, BRI. People sort of regularly ask me, well, what does Belt and Road Initiative mean? It's sort of, to the English speakers, it doesn't give a clear picture of what China's intentions are. And this is a difficult one because if you look at the Chinese translation, the literal translation is Yi Dai Yi Lu, excuse my appalling Mandarin pronunciation. Now, such sort of, so it's four syllables, such correlative four-character phrases are very common in Mandarin. For the Chinese, it would evoke, so I'm told, images of going forth to encompass the world on land and sea, and opening the world more closely with China and binding the world more closely with China. So that's the sort of the image of the expression and where it comes from. It was originally launched in 2013 by President Xi Jinping with a view to accelerate outbound investment and to consolidate China's position across the globe. Physically, BRI is best understood with references to the two key routes. First is the overland route from China through the Western Europe, encompassing sea, South and Southeast Asia, Russia, the Middle East, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. Second is the maritime route down the east coast of China, up through the South China Seas and into the South Pacific through India, Pakistan, also in the Middle East, and then onto the Mediterranean. The overland route is called the Belt, and the maritime route is called the Road. It's China's ambitious plan to link Asia and Europe and most of the countries in between. It will encompass in excess of 65% of the world's population and include over 65 countries. Its main goal is to create a gateway for China's huge domestic surplus capital and other resources, and to establish a platform for economic investments in most sectors, but with a very strong focus on energy, transport, particularly roads, ports and rail, and infrastructure projects. Other stated goals are connectivity of multiple trade routes, primarily export driven, but also imports into China, new export markets to help Chinese companies tap into those new markets. Many of the countries along the Belt and Road are developing countries, But there's also a strong aim for Chinese companies to break into the European markets in particular. Another stated goal is the overcapacity in the Chinese domestic market and exporting this capacity to new markets, providing a release of such capacity. And last but not least, political. China inevitably sees BRI as a way of accessing geopolitical power along the trade routes, using its enormous financing clout in much the same way that the United States used the Marshall Aid Program to resurrect war-torn Europe economies after World War II. According to some recent research produced by Refinitiv, a total of 184 projects valued at $137 billion were announced in the first quarter of 2020. Whilst concerns have been raised about the impact of COVID-19 on BRI, China has said that work on many projects continues. However, the first quarter did see, despite those impressive numbers, did see a considerable slowdown in new projects and initiatives being announced. A slowdown in China's economy may likely divert attention from BRI projects over the next 2 years, and I'll come on and say a little bit more about that in my summary. So as the COVID-19 crisis continues, Beijing is expected to work with major lenders and multilateral organizations such as the Asian Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank to provide relief to many economies in the BRI orbit. China has also rebooted the Health Silk Road to showcase how the BRI infrastructure network could serve as a mechanism for delivering medical and humanitarian aid. And over the last 6 months, we've seen many examples of China delivering humanitarian and other medical aid to countries suffering from COVID-19. Many of you will be familiar with this map. Here we have the economic belt and the maritime belt road. And I mean, the reality is that this just really shows a part of the Belt and Road. Really, the Belt and Road stretches all the way around the globe, well into Europe, the US to a lesser extent, but very much into Central and South America, and also Australasia. Turning now to some of the challenges facing BRI in Saudi and also in the Middle East. I don't really differentiate too much between Saudi and the Middle East. The impact is more or less equivalent. To date, the impact of the initiative in the Middle East has been relatively modest compared to other regions, such as Southeast Asia, Africa, and South and Central America. As we all know, oil is the basis of the Saudi-Sino relationships. China is Saudi Arabia's largest customer for crude oil, and Saudi Arabia is China's largest source of oil imports at approximately 20%. Saudi Arabia has agreed that it will participate in China's BRI initiative, and itself is a founding member of the Asian Development Bank, AIB. Trade between Saudi Arabia and China has grown at a rapid 16% compound annual growth between 2000 and 2016. The volume of trade as at 2016 was approximately $45 billion US dollars, representing nearly 35% of the GCC's trade with China in total. Saudi Arabia imports from China a diverse range of products, including mobile phones, computers, clothing, air conditioners, footwear, furniture, and other sort of household and industrial goods. Saudi Arabia's economy, or economic security, is coming under increasing pressure as a result of lower oil prices and high defense spending. As a result, it has recently undertaken a more proactive approach to securing markets for its crude oil and promoting investment and trade in Asia. In 2017, to deepen economic ties, King Salman undertook a 6-week tour of China, Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and the Maldives. Following bilateral meetings between the King and regional leaders, 21 agreements on investment in oil, petrochemicals, and renewable energies were signed. Increasingly, the Saudi-Sino relationship is becoming strategic as well as economic. In 2016, China elevated its relationships with Saudi Arabia to a strategic partnership. Saudi Arabia has increased security cooperation with China as it hedges its bets on the ability and willingness of the US, its traditional ally and political ally, to support it. And following meetings between King Salman and a special envoy, President Xi Jinping, in November 2016, the Saudi government unveiled a 5-year plan for Saudi-China security cooperation, which includes counter-terrorism cooperation and joint military drills. There's no denying Beijing's growing ambition to integrate the Middle East into the maritime Silk Road in particular, as illustrated by its push to develop a series of joint port industrial park complexes linking China to the Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and the Red Sea and the Mediterranean basin. China has found ready partners among the Gulf states, which have incorporated the build-up of logistics facilities into their respective national visions. Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have been early and active participants in BRI through the development of a chain of these port and industrial park complexes aimed at linking markets across the MENA region. It's therefore not surprising that 3 of the 5 leading destinations for Chinese investment into the region are Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt. And these projects include the UAE's Khalifa Port project, Oman's Duqm Special Economic Zone, Saudi's Jizan Port project, and Egypt's Tida Suez Zone. However, the Middle East is a sophisticated and highly developed projects market that has delivered hundreds of successful energy and infrastructure projects over the last 25 years. The Chinese are late arrivals, with their Asian competitors from Japan and Korea already very well entrenched in the Middle East. But recent successes, as mentioned, and significant solar projects in the UAE demonstrate a commitment by China to take a more proactive role in the Middle East market. And a recent good example, although an investment project rather than a development project, is the 49% stake that the Chinese government's Silk Road Fund has taken in Aqua Power's renewable energy projects across the Middle East region. Okay, so moving now on to the financing element. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sinosure, because obviously Sinosure is the export credit agency supporting Chinese companies going overseas, and it's important to understand the important role they play and the products they offer. The next 3 slides are all taken directly from Sinosure's webpage on the internet. And from the first one, you will see that the export credit insurance that they offer is pretty similar to what you'd expect from other OECD export credit agencies. They cover commercial risks and political risks, and the insurance is available for, in the case of buyer credits, it's available for up to 95% of the credit insurance and export deferred payment refinancing schemes. Slightly less for supplier credits, and I'll come on a little bit just to sort of show you the typical structures that we see. For the bankers amongst you, I mean, you'll be very familiar with this. This is the typical export credit scheme. Again, this is straight from Sinosure's website, and you can see it. Underpinning is a commercial contract between the exporter and the importer. The lending bank, Chinese bank, usually, not exclusively, but usually a Chinese bank, will make a facility available to the importer in the Middle East, and that importer will provide a repayment guarantee. I'll mention that in a bit more detail coming on. And Sinosure will provide the Chinese lending bank with that 90 or 95% insurance cover. And then moving on to the supplier credit, very similar to the buyer credit, except that except that there will be, in effect, a financing of the deferred payment under a commercial contract directly between the importer and the exporter. So in this case, the lending bank will be supplying the financing to the exporter in China rather than the importer. But Sinosure will obviously make available the same sort of cover, although at a 90% level rather than the 95% level available for the buyer credit model. So just to talk a little bit about the different sort of models available, and I will say at the outset that there's quite a lot of overlap between the various models. I mean, you can have an EPC plus F financing that incorporates public-private partnerships, as well as being on a project financing model. So it's a little bit arbitrary the way I've split it up, but I just wanted to sort of explain sort of the different approaches, or certainly how this is how the Chinese see it. They'll see it as EPC plus F, project finance, or PPP. But just bear in mind there is quite a bit of overlap between some of these models. Let's start with the EPC plus F. Here we have a Chinese contractor appointed by the Middle East employer, but in addition to the normal EPC contract, it will also offer to facilitate financing for the project. Generally, after completion and successful commissioning of the project, the contractor will exit the project subject to the usual defects liability period. The buyer credit scheme provided by the Chinese bank direct to the project company or employer based in the Middle East, as I described with the Sinosure diagram. The Chinese bank is 95% insured for commercial and political risks. And the loan amount made available to the Middle East customer will be up to 85% of the EPC cost, not the total project cost, with the balance being funded independently by the project employer. So remember, it's 85% of EPC cost, not the total project costs, which will often be more, including land and other costs. So the employer will have to find 15% as a down payment of the EPC cost. The term will be up to 15 years. The interest and fees, these will just be market rates. Plus, of course, as with all export credit agencies, there will be a Sinosure premium to be paid. And as with other export credit agencies, Sinosure calculates its premium based on the credit of the project involved, the region where the project is being implemented, and some other criteria, no doubt, that they don't make public. Security will typically be a government guarantee or a guarantee from a creditworthy sponsor, plus assets and project security in some cases, depending upon the overall credit of the guarantor. Sinosure sort of has a number of different ways of sort of looking at what is and is not a creditworthy sponsor, and this is for sort of non-government guarantors. And in the past, it's been explained to me that they apply 3 bankability tests, being profits should be positive over a 3-year period, asset liability ratio mustn't be below 70%, and the net assets of the guarantor should be at least 2 times the insured sum. Now, the insured sum is the principal plus the cumulative interest over the life of the project. So those are the 3 basic tests. Pass those tests, and you should be acceptable to Sinosure, all other factors being considered. The model is attractive, obviously, to Chinese contractors, as no separate investment is required on their part, and they're paid on a milestone basis by the Chinese banks. So Chinese banks will pay them directly rather than going through the employer. So very easy for the contractor to make this work. And of course, the model is attractive to Middle East owners and employers, as in these days, sort of constrained financing and difficulty in raising financing. The Chinese solution can be attractive and indeed competitive. Moving on to the second of the models, which is the sort of the PPP model. This, of course, as most of you will know, is very common in the Middle East. We've been seeing PPP projects mostly in the utility sector, electricity and water, for the last 20 to 25 years. So nothing new for the market there. For the Chinese contractors, it is slightly new. It involves the Chinese contractors undertaking the EPC and also being an investor in the project, and maybe in addition to that, helping with the financing. The project company will be co-owned by the developers and is awarded the concession to build, finance, and operate the project in the normal way. So this implies a long-term investment for Chinese contractors, which most of them will not be familiar with, of up to maybe 15 to 30 years, depending upon the length of the concession. Most Chinese contractors will look to try and exit the project earlier. So they will look at sort of options available for them to sort of sell their shares, usually sort of after they've constructed the project and the defects liability period has expired. So there's already a little bit of a tension between the long-term nature of the PPP model and the concessions, and what the Chinese really want to do, which is sort of to build it and then to offload their shares and move on to new projects. Bearing in mind that most of these Chinese companies are construction companies, so they're looking at the construction side rather than an asset holding position. Of course, I mean, there is increased exposure for the Chinese companies over and above the construction, although there is the possibility of earning shareholder returns on the project, as well as operation and maintenance returns, where the Chinese company is involved as part of the O&M consortium. However, investment in overseas projects requires central government approvals, and this usually takes between 6 and 12 months at least to obtain. In the current market, this is likely to be tougher to obtain. But many Chinese contractors are actively looking at PPP projects as they themselves recognize that the market has changed and that Chinese financing has become more difficult to source. Lastly, looking at the project finance model, and this may or may not be a PPP project. These obviously are more challenging and accordingly less established for the Chinese. Sinosure does have a separate project finance model, but as of the end of last year when I last met with them, they say it's rarely used, and when it has been used, it's mostly been used in sort of the IPP power sector. But I suspect going forward, it will take more prominence. One good example is the Hassyan power project, a coal project, clean coal project here in the UAE that was used by the banks here on a project finance basis. And that was not, interestingly, not covered by Sinosure. Time permitting, I've got an additional slide on Hassyan just to show you the final project structure on that. As many of you know, project finance requires a bankable project structure, which is more demanding. Middle East has 20 years experience in the utility sector and also oil and gas, but less experience of delivery successfully of infrastructure projects on a PF basis. Many Middle East countries have passed PPP laws in the last 3 or 4 years, but the challenge will be for banks and developers to develop bankable structures for projects outside of the energy sector and the utility sector, where there are usually government guarantees or quasi-government guarantees available. Without government guarantees or support, road, rail, ports, airports, industrial parks, and building projects will be more difficult to finance. However, with lower oil prices, many Middle East governments are looking to include PPP in their financing model. And so I'm sure they, along with their advisors, will be looking at ways in which they can support PPP projects in their countries. And I suspect we will see hybrid models around the Middle East structured as sort of maybe PPP light type structures. Here's the Hassyan clean coal project diagram that I just mentioned to you. It was a clean coal project here in the UAE. The two main developers were a consortium comprised of Aqua and their Chinese contractor, Harbin Electric, and DEWA, the electricity and water authority here in Dubai. They had respectively a 49, 51% holding. Harbin Electric was the EBC contractor, and there was a consortium for the O&M contractor. Fuel was supplied through DUSIP in Dubai, and the power was purchased on a long-term power purchase agreement by Dubai Electricity and Water Authority. The project was a 2.4 gigawatt clean coal project, I think the first here in the Middle East. Total project investment was 3.4 billion US dollars, 25-year power purchase agreement with DEWA, and a financing of 2.47 billion. And as I mentioned, it was significant that the financing of this project involved a number of Chinese banks, most of the big Chinese commercial banks, but it was not Sinosure insured. So unusually, the Chinese banks and the other international banks took project finance risk on an uninsured basis, which I think was a sort of a first of its kind, certainly for many of the Chinese banks. So, I mean, lastly, to sum up, what's been the sort of the impact of COVID-19 on infrastructure projects here in the Middle East? There's no doubt that the impact of COVID-19 and combined with the US-China trade and other disputes has had a real impact on China's Belt and Road Initiative rollout. Not just in the Middle East, whereas we've seen to date, BRI has had a more modest impact, but also globally. At the delayed National People's Congress held in summer in Beijing, it was hugely significant that the Belt and Road Initiative was rarely referred to in the subsequent policy announcements, nor was there specific mention of new capital for the BRI initiative. This represents quite a significant downplaying of Belt and Road, considering that only last year we witnessed Belt and Road and President Xi's pronouncements on Belt and Road elevated to being part of the Communist Party's constitution at the 19th Party Convention in Beijing last year. Inevitably, there will, as we've already seen from the Refinitiv figures, a slowdown in BRI projects, but certainly not a cut-off. I think the focus will be on existing projects that have already been started and trying to bring these to completion quickly. And also, I think a focus on, if I could say, the better quality and the better structured projects. Chinese contractors may also have to consider investing themselves into the projects, maybe under the PPP or similar models, in a way that previously they've been more reluctant to do so. We have not really seen this type of investment from Chinese companies in the Middle East projects market, where the Chinese have to date been largely playing the role of EPC contractor or equipment supplier. But this, I think, will change. We're also likely to see Chinese contractors working more with regional and international developers and development banks to develop projects and moving away from the established Chinese model of doing everything themselves and with exclusive Chinese partners and Chinese financing. In this connection, it's interesting to note that the recent bids that I saw announced last week for the hugely significant utility infrastructure project for the Red Sea development projects were led by Aqua alongside Energy China and NG Mazda alongside Power China. So both of those international developers have chosen large Chinese energy contractors as their partners. I think we can expect to see more of this type of cooperation going on in projects in Saudi Arabia, but also across the broader Middle East spectrum. That's all I have time for. There's just a couple of articles up there that you'll be able to download on the link afterwards on a little bit more information on the Belt and Road Initiative, Middle East PPP, and the Silk Road generally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Just a quick, few notes from me. I will start with some of the challenges that we have seen in Saudi when trying to work with Chinese contractors. I mean, the first and the main challenge that we see is the security regime in Saudi, and that historically has been the case. I mean, taking and perfecting security in Saudi had many uncertainties, and for the Chinese contractors to take on a project and finance it, as Neil mentioned, they almost always will require a sort of a full enforceable security package over the assets of the project. So that historically has been the case. Now with the new security regulations that came out in Saudi in April, I think that challenge should now be easy to overcome. Hopefully we can sort of start working again with Chinese contractors quite soon. And hopefully, Sinosure can get comfortable with now the Saudi security regime. So, as I said, the new security regime in Saudi, you can take, security over tangible and intangible assets. Those can be taken by foreign entities now, registered easily at a center that's established by the Ministry of Commerce. Neil and I, gave a webinar on the new Saudi security regime in July. So, if any of you would like to receive a copy of the material and the recording of the webinar, please reach out to to me or Neil, and we can happily send that to you. The second challenge that we have seen in Saudi is basically its timeline, I think, and culture. And Neil, you know better than I do because you interact more with them. But I think, Chinese contractors and Chinese banks and Sinoshore, basically, when they take on a project, they usually take quite some time in analyzing the project and setting out the requirements. So basically, you have to be extremely patient. And expect the timelines not to be as quick as you would expect them to be in other sort of jurisdictions in Europe, the US, and even the Middle East. So basically, because of their unfamiliarity with the Saudi legal regime, you should expect a lot of back and forth and many requests for sort of clarifications that are not that they are not familiar with, the Chinese contractors. Those are sort of the two main challenges from my perspective. As Neil, said earlier, in terms of opportunities, there's a lot of liquidity in China, obviously. Chinese contractors, because of the various initiatives they have that Neil explained, they have a big appetite for projects in Saudi. And I have seen many of those contractors set up shop in Saudi recently over the past few years. Some of them are relatively, although obviously, in China they're quite big, but their operations in Saudi are quite small. And so basically they are looking around to take on more projects, and they're sort of working towards, developing their expertise in the market and growing their team and growing their project pipeline. So basically, I think, knowing how they operate, Chinese contractors, they will probably, they are still committed to the region, to Saudi in particular. So they would still, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next, few years, they would continue to grow and take on more projects once they start, developing a better understanding of the market, and also couple that with the opportunities that the Saudi market present for them, particularly with all of those mega projects in Saudi, NEOM, Red Sea, as Neil mentioned, Amala, etc. That will give them a lot of opportunities that they can chase, and I'm sure they will be chasing those. So I think, with the liquidity that they have, their expertise, and their sort of appetite, I think we should expect a lot of Chinese contractors to be operating in the market on a bigger scale in the next few years. I mean, that's it really from my end. I think we, Neil, unless you have anything else to add, we can open up the floor for any questions. I mean, if you've got any questions, I think, okay, everyone, I think that's it. We'll share the slides and video recorded after the session with you. And as I said, any follow-up questions, please feel free to pick up the phone or email those questions to me and Neil, and we're happy to address those. One question came in here. Yeah. Well, that's just okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. It was really good to have you this morning. Thank you, Neil, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks.